We just want to share like bits and pieces about the environmental justice movement. So first slide here. So Martin Luther King, he was actually, when he was killed, he was working on an issue with the sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee. He was campaigning for them. And they had gone on a strike because, they were dealing with unsafe working conditions. People were losing limbs, people were sick, and people were underpaid. And so they saw it as, this is the majority of the sanitation workers were black at this time, and they saw it as an issue of this is part of the civil rights struggle, right? We're being treated in these ways, or we don't have the same kind of safety and health protections that other workers have, in large part because of our color, right? So King jumped on with them to help amplify their movement, since he had already, had many successes and kind of garnered a large following, or at least attention from the American public. And he started to ask questions alongside the sanitation workers movement. First of all, he was asking questions that were economic, right? And there was starting to be a fusion in this movement between the labor rights movement and the civil rights movement, which surprisingly sometimes have been at odds, right? So labor rights movement is examining the rights of workers, the length of hours that you work, your pay, your benefits, or your lack thereof. Your capacity to be hired and fired by employers with notice or without notice. And this is part of what the labor rights union was working on. And civil rights union movement, I think we all have some sense of what they were working on. So he was asking questions that are not only civil rights related, but also economic. They're also looking at the pay of workers, benefits, and whatnot. And he also started to look into sanitation. When we think about sanitation, it could definitely be a human or civil rights issue, but it's also, where does all of our trash go? Has anyone here been to a landfill? Yeah. What was your experience?
Not pleasant. It made me really sad.
Yeah. It's sad. It's amazing. I recommend it. If you haven't been to a landfill, I recommend going. Because it's something to see what happens what happens? Where does it go? Who has to take care of it? People live in it. That's right. People make their living around the world off of landfills. Right? And where are the landfills located?
Poor.
Okay. So
My neighborhood.
Sure. So King was killed.
It's down south in between here and Pueblo.
Yep.
I was going to say, Pikes Peak Community College, this campus is on a landfill.
Oh,
Yeah.
is it?
I got a call about if there was a pandemic of dogs dying, where would they go? And our site was identified as one of those places. So there's an old landfill here.
So if they had to dispose of the bodies of dogs, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Were they talking about future tests or past tests?
Future, like if something were to happen.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Where cards and folders went for $5.
Yeah. Yeah. And how many people have been to Red Rocks? Open space.
Oh, is that
Also, a landfill. Yeah.
like old landfills? Like
Well,
If you
yeah.
read the signs, there, there's a dumping area,
Oh.
a big vast open space of the Red Rocks features.
And then what is a landfill? Just a bunch of trash, just like all piled up.
Yeah, basically,
Just
it's,
like
it's,
a
it's
bunch
all
of
of our
trash.
it's all of our solid waste, and there's different ways to do it. But part of the strategy is you bury some of it, and then you bring a new load on top, and then you bury it, and you bring a new load on top.
Just a bunch of trash.
Yeah, and then sometimes the solid waste starts to decompose, starts to rot, and it sometimes lets out gases, so you have to like ventilate it and release the gases, or it can become explosive in some cases.
Yeah, it doesn't start to decompose in the way that like compost decomposes, where it's like nice, friendly dirt when you're done. It's not stinky. It's anaerobic, so it's actually a really harmful way of decomposing, and it's not like really going back to the earth. And it does have really bad gases, including methane, which is a really powerful greenhouse gas. It's actually more powerful than carbon. So we use carbon. We talk about carbon as being a climate change gas, but actually methane is much more powerful than carbon. So it has all of these different impacts. You don't want to live on it, partly for the gases, partly for the anaerobic stuff, but also for the settling that happens, right? As stuff gets piled on and as time goes on, it settles in funky ways that can be dangerous for communities.
So this is just part of like, I think it's just all of us just trying to learn the history of the land that we're living on and that we're recreating on, and that when we go to school or when we work, right? It's like a lot of times things look like one thing and they can be quite something else. So anyway, so we were talking about the sanitation worker strikes in Memphis, Tennessee, and the beginning of this seeing of a connection between an issue that is an environmental issue, sanitation, waste disposal, and a civil rights issue, the treatment of the workers. Okay, this is Warren County, North Carolina, and what you're seeing here is basically there was a question in North Carolina about where to site a new dump. And I think it was PCBs, which are an extremely toxic form of plastic that a lot of our piping is made out of. And so when the PCBs are being disposed of and changed out, well, where do we put the waste? So North Carolina, they're going to create a PCB landfill, and they were selecting the site. And they had a number of counties to select the site from, and the state chose to select the site in primarily African American county. So after trying to fight it on the legal level, many members of this community, they basically saw this. They're like, this is racism. That's why this is happening. That's why our community is the site for this landfill. And so they used some of the strategies and the techniques from the civil rights movement, right, including nonviolent resistance. And they laid themselves out on the road, and as the trucks were coming on the first day to dump some of these soils mixed with PCBs, they were like, you're not coming into our community, and they held the trucks up. So this was one of the first times when consciously the strategies, the techniques, the thinking, and the workers from the environment or from the civil rights movement were working on an environmental issue and starting to see the overlap or the intersection. So the gentleman at the bottom here is Robert Bullard, or Bullard. I think it depends on what part of the country you're from. And he's one of the first folks, he's a sociologist, and he's one of the first folks to identify this pattern that we talked about this a little bit in the other session called basically environmental racism is the pattern that he identified. And so he was a resident of Houston, Texas, and they had a similar question. They had questions about where there was going to be the siting of several waste and disposal facilities, some of them incinerators, right? So you have your solid waste that goes in the ground, and then you have your incinerators. Another way that we dispose of our trash is that we expose it to really high heat, and we more or less disintegrate it, except it leaves some vapor and some particulates, which is like little additive stuff, right? And as you can guess, you don't want to breathe this stuff in. It smells bad, and it's poisonous. So the city of Houston was like, where do we site our solid waste landfills and our incinerators? And what he started to see was the places where the incinerators and the solid landfills were sited were predominantly, once again, in African American counties. And African Americans made up 25% of the population of Houston, and yet 4 out of 5 in a span of a few years new landfills that were built, or new incinerators were built, were located and sited in African American neighborhoods. And they also look too, because you want to say, okay, because one of the questions that people often have is, well, is it really just a money thing? So he looked at African American communities where folks didn't own their homes and were more low income, and he looked at middle and higher income African American communities where people did own the home and had long time residency, and the pattern held throughout the income spectrum. So he and his wife, who was a lawyer, they actually, after identifying this pattern, they started to fight the siting of one of these landfills, and they weren't successful. But what they were successful in doing was putting this pattern that they identified on the map and putting it into the public consciousness of the United States. This picture here, I think this is Bay Area in California, and each red dot, this is from the EPA's toxic release inventory, and each red dot on that map represents a site that is releasing some form of toxin. And in this case, I think it's air release facilities. So it's not solid waste, it's stuff that moves and travels through the air. So each one of those dots represents a facility that is releasing some kind of toxin into the air. And you can see there the gradation of color from white to gray represents the percentage of people of color in that area. So just take a look at that. Okay, so let's try to chop some things out. Here's what we'll allow this slide at.
If you go forward, is it?
Okay. Shoot, cut one of them out. Sorry. So Bullard, he and his wife started to make connections with communities of color across the United States, and not just African American communities, but Latino communities, Native communities, and even in many cases poor white communities, lower income white communities. And they started to find, looking at zip codes and looking at the siting of toxic facilities and unwanted land uses, and they started to find this pattern held. So they had the first People of Color conference around the environment in 1992, and at this conference, they started to develop this idea of environmental racism. So first, any policy, practice, or directives that differentially affects or disadvantages, whether intended or unintended, individuals, groups, or communities because of their race or color. Environmental racism in public policy and industrial practices results in benefits being provided to whites and costs being shifted to people of color. So a couple of things in there. One, intended or unintended?
Mix of both.
Mix of both, totally, right? And a lot of times when we think about racism, and I think this holds for sexism as well, and I think it holds for many of these other isms. When we think about racism, we tend to think about it as, you treated me badly because you don't like how I look or my group affiliation. But that wasn't the primary motive of racism. And it's not the primary motive. The primary motive is to stratify your society. And the primary motive is to make some people do things that other people don't want to do. And to make some people do things and benefit from their doing of them. That's the primary motive for racism. And then you design your society willy-nilly around that motive. Okay? So anything that reinforces that stratification of society around like a color hierarchy based on who wants to do what and who does not have the choice to do what and who is forced to be around and in certain situations. Anything that reinforces that is part of a racist system or structure. I took several slides out of here, but there's Stokely Carmichael. He was post-civil rights movement, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, post-civil rights movement. He was a leader in that movement. He later changed his name to Kwame Ture, and he he identified this term institutional racism, which basically says it's not just about you and me personally, but it's about policies, rules, practices, and social structures that reinforce racist worldviews and racist behaviors and racist outcomes. So intended or unintended. And then the other is environmental racism in public policies, industrial practices, benefits being provided to whites, costs being shifted to people of color. So what's it, just off the head, what's an environmental benefit?
Clean air.
Clean air. Yep. It used to be something we could take for granted. It was just part of reality. It's not now. It's an environmental benefit. What else? Water. Yeah. Yeah. And that could be, it could be clean water or even really, I mean, just living next to a body of water. Or oceans. Yeah. Or oceans. I mean, why is beachfront property so expensive? People want it. It's beautiful. You know, it improves your health. Right? Where are the most expensive houses in the city of Colorado Springs, generally? Why the mountains? Why? Yeah, it's beautiful up there. You got a view. You walk out, you wake up in the morning, you look out your view, you feel like a sovereign. Right? Versus you open up your window and somebody else's house is right up on you. Or not somebody else's house, the Purina dog chow factory. And just what does that do to your self-esteem in both cases? And I'm just talking psychologically now. I'm not talking about then you open up your window and you smell what comes out of the Purina dog chow factory. Okay? So environmental benefits going to whites, burdens to the people of color. So through the work of Bullard, but not just Bullard, but really this environmental justice movement, it started actually with the first Bush administration actually took on this idea of environmental racism. And in the Clinton administration, they passed this executive order 120 in 98 that basically recognized that environmental racism was a thing, and they, to try to counter it, they combined civil rights law and the National Environmental Policy Act, and basically tried to, in the intersection of those two sets of laws and policies, they tried to address environmental racism. So what that meant in practice is that part of what the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, part of their mandate now was to watch out for and try to, prevent instances of environmental racism. So the environmental justice movement kind of defined, like, not only is there environmental racism, but the EPA should be striving to help the nation align with environmental justice. So this is the definition that's on the, you can find this on the EPA's website. Well, this is interesting stuff, right? The changes of these kind of public government documents and the changing of what information is available in those public government documents, and also what priorities are available. It's an interesting thing to check out, regardless of where you stand politically. It's just something to check out. Like, to what degree does an administration have the ability to decide a national policy that is going to outlive them? So, the civil rights law was looking at fair treatment and basically said there's no government institution, no entity in the United States that receives government funding can discriminate based on race, based on color, based on religion, based on gender, so on, right? These are the kind of protected classes under our law. So they took that and then they applied it to environmental regulation. So, piece 2 to point out. So, fair treatment means that no group of people should have to bear a disproportionate share of the negative environmental consequences resulting from industrial and governmental and commercial operations and policies, right? And part of what that's getting at is, look, we all drive cars. We all make garbage. You know, we all pollute the air. We all pollute the water. When you flush your toilet, it's fresh water. We're all doing it. And yet some communities are having to bear more of the immediate consequences of that in terms of their health, in terms of their property values, in terms of their psychology than other communities. So that's disproportionate. Okay? So no community should have to bear that. And then another piece here is the importance of meaningful involvement in decision making. This is another way that not just racism, but all the isms work in our society, is that some people make decisions for other people that do not affect them as much as they affect the people that they're making the decisions for. And anytime you have that situation, the chances of abuse of power are high. So meaningful involvement, people have an opportunity to participate in decisions about activities that may affect their environment or health. The public's contributions or influence regulatory agency decisions. Their concerns will be considered. Decision makers will seek out and facilitate the involvement of those potentially affected. Right? So that's trying to say, if you are going to build a landfill in a community, you have to contact that community. You have to contact the community's leaders. You have to look like, what are the concerns? What are they facing? You have to be upfront and transparent with them about it. You can't just make a decision from the state level that's going to affect the county and not contact the people and the political bodies of that county. Okay, so part of what we wanted to talk about, what we want to focus on in this time, is this intersection between social justice issues and environmental issues. Again, social justice, are typical isms, and the attempts to correct those isms, the attempts to correct racism, the attempts to correct classism, sexism, the heteronormative, what do you call it? What's the name of that? Yeah, right? This idea that the only valid relationship is between male and female as this society sees it, right? These are social justice concerns, right? And then the way that those intersect with environmental concerns, clean air, clean water, beauty, right? We don't want to chop all the woods down and then be surrounded by stuff that we made that goes out of style in 20 years. We want to be in the long-term environment of nature, right? So these are standard environmental issues, standard social justice issues. We want to look at the crossroads. So, sprawl. Y'all know sprawl? You heard that term, sprawl? What's sprawl? Anyone that's heard?
Suburbanizing, growing, just spreading out.
Yeah, suburbanizing, growing. Anybody grew up in Colorado? Okay. What have you seen just in terms of development in Colorado? I'm going to point to the students, Colorado. I know you're ready.
The rent is crazy.
Houses are built like crazy. You can't afford to be there.
Yeah, well, that's another one, right? We can hardly afford it.
It's really hard.
Yeah. So houses are built like crazy. You can hardly afford to live here. What else?
On the northeast side, there's so much more, like she said, houses, like
In the springs.
in the springs.
Uh-huh.
The springs,
It's
yeah.
everywhere.
Yeah.
That's right.
But like, especially that side of town, like I remember as a child, like my grandma had her house, and there was nothing but dirt, and now there's like 5 come and goes on every single corner.
It's like in Landfills, like all the stuff that was built. I remember when all of that was
And
just
I
like,
think
nothing was there
That's it.
before. It's
It-
just Landfills.
That's exactly it. So I grew up in Aurora and Denver, and there was one point in my life where I could face west and I would see Denver metro area, and I could face east and I saw a couple of power lines, a couple of these weird looking golf ball things. Anybody from Aurora, you know what I'm talking about? And then I knew over a couple of hills was that landfill that we had been to. But man, it was mostly just hills. Okay? And now I go out there and it's like built to the horizon. And that's the Front Range is expanding along its eastern border. The distance or the spaces between Denver, Castle Rock, Colorado Springs, Pueblo, all of it's being filled in. Now, I'm not just saying this is wrong. because people, there's all these people. People want life. Colorado life, living's all right, right? But it creates a lot of problems. And it's not just about the number of people, it's about the way that people are laid out in space, right? Until mid-20th century, urban cities were basically built. They were built in clusters and they were built vertically. And after World War II, there was a lot of, well, let's go there. So the Federal Housing Administration was a body that was put together by the Roosevelt administration during the whole New Deal portion of American history, and they had a lot of good effects on the country. And they had a lot of positive, strong effects on the country. One of them was the creation of the highway system. The highway system came out of that World War II, post-World War II era. It came out as tax money. It wasn't built privately. It came out of citizen tax money. And it put a lot of people to work. Right? And it made it so that the automobile market exploded. Okay? So suddenly, cities that have been designed in a more localized way with trains, with people able to basically walk a short distance to get their basic needs met, groceries, clothing, place of work, suddenly all that was laid out over this vast American landscape. And the places where people lived, the distance between where they lived and where they worked expanded massively. So what does that mean? That mean
more environmental impact.
Yeah. How so?
You just got to travel further. You're going to use more fossil fuels and different things because you have to go for extended amounts of days rather than living by the sun like they used to. And being done at night, we now have extended that day to maximize it to our benefit, I guess, is what we would be saying.
Yeah, right. I mean, just do this sometimes. You guys have the advantage of hills here. Go up in the hills and just look at the city. Just watch it. It's 24 hours. Somewhere there's an engine just going, and there's something going into that engine that's burning to make all this possible. Okay, so you got that, and you got the fact that people are driving on the roads, traffic, air pollution. And air pollution really started to move into the public consciousness. It was localized in certain places. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the English almost choked in London based off how much pollution they kicked up into the air. And the Chinese are having a similar problem as they make a lot of our stuff. But on a whole, the pollution problem didn't surface into the American public's mind until the early 1960s. And this is partly how it surfaced. So we have these air pollution problems. Okay? Now, we can see the environmental impacts of this right now, of sprawl, right? Also, going back to this picture, you got to water all those lawns. Right? But some of the social justice impacts were these. Have y'all heard the term white flight? Yeah? White flight. White flight is this phenomenon that of mass exodus of white people out of the urban areas and into the newly created suburbs. Okay? When a lot of the white folks moved out of the suburbs post World War II, or moved out to them and out of the cities, part of what happened too is a lot of capital investment went with them. And that's partly why there was a disinvestment in the urban areas and in urban neighborhoods, and that led to, and when you disinvest in a neighborhood, it's private and it's public, right? Private means businesses don't move there. One example of that is grocery stores. Grocery stores started to move out to the suburbs. It was to their advantage. They have a huge parking lot. They have more customers. Mega stores like Target, Walmart, all post-World War II didn't exist in the same way that they exist now. Okay? So what does that mean? The urban areas oftentimes, the grocery stores are sucked out of the urban areas. Another thing that means on the public level is as the tax base drops, then services like garbage disposal, which we identified before as an environmental problem, garbage disposal in a lot of urban areas is more infrequent. So then what does that mean? You look around and there's stuff everywhere. Again, what does that do for your mind state? Where are we out of time? I have no idea. We're at 20 minutes? 15. Okay. So those are that and then this idea that the cities were dirty. And there's a whole psychology to environmental justice too, which is basically this. Just even this term, white trash. What's up with that? What are you saying? You're saying a lot. Right? So part of this idea of environmental justice is that the people that a society doesn't care so much about or doesn't want get put with the trash, or we put the trash with those people. So what kind of perception does that create publicly about the people that live next to the dirty stuff?
They're the dirty stuff.
Yeah. And they're waste. Right? Disposable. You can use them up, you can throw them out. Okay? So, is there anything else I'm trying to remember? All right, next one. All right, another one. Pesticides. Is this an environmental or social justice issue? Sure. How so?
Well, the environmental, Colorado used to be all ranches and farms. And then we came in, all the regulations and stuff like that. Rights and the rights.
So we could
Oil and gas came in, and then when they left, we put in these.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, now, and I also want to say, okay, the industrial food system, debatably, produces more food than any other agricultural system in human history. Debatably. Right? And part of the way that it's done that is huge farm plots where you grow the same thing. Now, the problem of growing the same thing is that if you have one pest, the one pest has a heyday. You heard it, maybe I'm old-fashioned. You heard that? You have a heyday. With one pest, if you like corn and you're that one pest, if you had a garden that was a little bit more mixed up, you like some corn over here, but then there's all this, all the spinach and tomatoes, well, then you have to jump. The population's controlled a little bit because your food source isn't so abundant. But if it's one pest and you got miles of corn, go, multiply. So to take care of those pests, or try to stop those pests, what do? We started to use these chemical fertilizers. And by the way, chemical fertilizers, what is one of the main ingredients in all of our chemical fertilizers? Pesticides, yeah, but what's one of the main? Sulfate, isn't it? What's that? Sulfate?
She said formaldehyde.
Okay, so I don't know those pieces, but I'll share this one. Y'all might be one of those. One of the bases of all pesticides, though, petroleum.
Yeah.
Right? So we use the same stuff that we power that plane with. We spray it on the fields, mixed potentially with sulfates and what was the other one that somebody said? Formaldehydes, right? So that the petroleum serves as the base for some of the more lethal toxic chemicals. So what that means in part is that our whole sense, and then how are we spraying those whole fields?
Through crop dusters.
We're doing it through crop dusters, and also there's people doing it. Yeah. And oftentimes the people, okay, first of all, it's not just any people.
It's the low income.
Statistically, it's the low income, and it's especially these days the brown. A lot of our farm workers, there's a statistic that came out of, I think it was sponsored by the USDA. 75% of farm workers in the United States are Mexican. And a large portion of the Mexican farm workers are of Mexican origin. That is to say, they are citizens of Mexico. So when you're spraying these pesticides and the planes are flying over you, spraying them, those people who have immediate contact with that poison, and look what he's wearing. He's just got a bunch of shirts tied over his face. He doesn't have a gas mask. He doesn't have a hazmat suit. He's just got a hat, shades, and a bunch of shirts tied over his face. He doesn't have the proper equipment. So those bodies are the ones that are picking up that toxic exposure. And then you go and you take it home. So they're paying the cost for what we all benefit from. I eat strawberries, I eat raspberries. Right? So again, it's like one group is disproportionately affected from something that the wide populace benefits from. And we also know that what pesticides, so they stop those pests. Although the pests sometimes get stronger each generation, and the poison amount has to increase because they're bugs. Bugs live and die, and their evolution is rapid. So they're building up tolerance to it. And then as we eat more and more pesticides, it's getting into our bodies, not only the workers, but the eaters, the consumers. Right? And you've seen, I cannot factually say this is true, but you've seen in recent years an explosion of food allergies. I used to chill out with old German New Yorker, this old lady from Germany in New York, and she would walk through my door and be like, "What is this tomato? This is crap. Back in my day, tomatoes was like this. What are all these sicknesses that kids are getting?" I've seen an explosion of food allergies in the last 20, 30 years. So, what is this?
So much pesticides are used.
Yes, 1990 base data. 20 million kilograms of pesticides annually. Okay, so as the agricultural techniques that are used in the industrialized world spread, you're seeing the same problems in other parts of the world, just the increase of pesticide use. And again, let's go with the environmental lens. If they increase the pesticide use, what does that mean? It means increasing petroleum use, right? And we all know, well, some people debate this. This is actually, some people still debate it, but you all have heard of peak oil? Okay, so we got all these fracking wells in northern Colorado. Just 5 minutes? Okay. And then we take a break and then we come back, or is it a different class?
We take a break, so we go.
Okay, cool, great. So we have all these fracking wells in northern Colorado. The oil industry really sprung up in the early 20th century. Okay, there was a lot of easy-to-find petroleum sources, and people learned how to use petroleum as a power source over steam, and that obviously exploded the Industrial Revolution in a big way. And so oil was really cheap, energy was really cheap in the first half of this century. And as we've gone along, people have developed more sophisticated techniques to search for oil. And one way that they've done that is they've used satellites. And what they do basically is they blast the Earth with sonar, with sound beams. And then the sonar passes through the whole Earth. And by the way that it passes through and bounces back to the satellite receiver, they can tell what the composition of different parts of the Earth is. So they can say, underneath the Earth, there's a giant cave, and in that cave there's a bunch of oil, and they can estimate how much oil is in that cave. And so they've done these measurements on the whole planet, and they basically found that if the whole planet is a cup with this much oil, after about and it's debated. Some people say we reached it in the 70s. Some people say we reached it in the 90s. Some people say we're going to reach it in 12 years or so. But basically, we're down to half. We've gone past the halfway point. And as the amount of oil on planet Earth, and it takes billions of years to make oil. That's dinosaur flesh, the oil. As the amount of oil decreases, the price of it is just going to go up. So if we're using more of it in agriculture, that's less for vehicles, that's less for power, and so on. So as we spread it, we're using it faster and there's less of it. Side note. So
I'm sorry, did you say sound waves or what was the...
sonar.
Sonar.
Yeah, so like sound
Sonar.
waves. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It's like the way that bats will fly in a room and
Right.
let out a scream, and then they're like, all right, the room's about this big. We can do that with the earth, and we can do that with...
So what would that do to a person's brain?
Well, I don't know. Some frequencies will travel right through you
Right.
and don't seem to harm you. Now, this is just another thing. I don't even know if I should say this, but just another thing. Another movement I think that's about to hit and become a public environmental issue is all the frequencies that are moving through our environments.
Right.
I mean, there's satellite that this is the picking up. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They're all over the place. It's all over the place.
There are some people that think that certain types of diabetes are caused by some of these frequencies. For some people, it's kind of like some people can be more sensitive to like dairy, right? Some people can be more sensitive to different frequencies.
Mm-hmm. So just to restate again, that like part of what we're looking at is, we've changed the environment. Human beings, human activity has changed the environment. It's not just climate change. It is not just climate change. It's all over. It's the water, the plastic in the water, right? It's all over the place. And not only have we changed the way that the planet circulates its materials, but some of those circulations are toxic, and some communities and even some nations bear a disproportionate burden of those toxins. Another thing that's really starting to happen now is waste trading. The United States and a lot of industrialized countries who produce more waste than the countries that are developing, we sell it. Or we make them trade debt that they have to us to take our waste. So, anyway.
No, let it out. Let it out.
Yeah.
Come on with it.
Yeah, well, I guess in these, we have, a minute and a half for a break?
You're fine, take your time.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
We adjust.
Yeah. I guess I'm just wondering, what's, just hearing that, what's limiting you all?
What's what?
Living, what kind of questions, what's bubbling?
Cynicism lives in it.
Yeah. Yep.
So you said the oil content in the cup, right? 12 years. There was a study that was just released saying that our goose is already cooked, right? Our planet's trash. And within the next, I can't remember the day, 2023 or whatever.
20 years.
In 20 years, yeah. Do you think that this, the 20 years is because of the oil, or we've done enough harm that in 20 years it's going to become prevalent that we're kind of doomed to live in the society that we've created?
Well, I mean, I have one part of me. Okay, there's a book that we were reading at this school that I work with, and it's written by a woman who was one of Michelle's teachers, Joanna Macy, and she talks about active hope, which is to say, on one level, we're in a hopeless situation. It's a predictable, we can predict certain things. They're coming, right? If we continue our activities in the way that we're continuing. But then once you kind of accept that things are bad, then it's okay, so then what can we do? How do we get to work on these things? What can we do? And part of what the environmental justice movement is this is oftentimes communities that are the most burdened and have the least financial and political resources, and they're pushing back against a lot of our industry, and they're pushing back against a lot of our government. And here's the thing: if my neighborhood is here, your neighborhood's here, and mine's here, and I don't want to put waste in the water here, so I put it up just before your neighborhood, and then your neighborhood gets it. You're more affected, but it still gets out into the water, all of our water. So if there are places where you cannot if you can look away from certain people and places, they get affected immediately, but in the long term, we all get affected. And part of the way that pollution happens, it can still happen, and we can excuse it, is that we send it to places and people that we don't want to look at, that we might think are trash. So one of the services, you might say, that the environmental justice movement is doing in those communities of color that are looking at, and lower income communities that are looking out for their own community, they're actually putting the pressure on all of us to make us face our waste. And then when we face our waste, we might make choices to make less of it. So a lot of times these are communities that don't have like a long-term strategy. And they're fighting one battle after another, but like they're doing it. And they've changed some public policy, and they've changed some practices. So I feel like we know these things are coming. We do. I mean, if you think that the way we do science has any validity, not saying it doesn't have problems, not saying it is not political and in certain ways can be swayed, but if you think it has any validity from the way that we do science, we know these things are coming. We know what's happening, going to happen. You can see it happening. Yeah.
I feel like I want to also say that part of our work is not just to connect these problems, but to say environmental problems are social justice problems, and social justice problems always have an environmental part. But to also say, imagine if these movements come together. Imagine if we combine forces rather than fighting our own issues separately, even though they have a lot of the same root causes, and even the same ways of manifesting. In ecology, there's this idea of the ecotone. Any of you heard of that? Where two biological regions meet, two ecosystems meet. We're in one, essentially now, right? And you have where the plains are and where the mountains are. And where they meet is a special area called an ecotone, which is more diverse, more fertile, more abundant, more productive than the other two areas it's next to. Because you have all of the creatures and the flora and fauna from the plains, for example, and all the flora and fauna from the mountains, and some that only exist in this in-between zone. Right? So you have like double the stuff going on. And so in ecology, those are really important areas, the ecotones. And so in a way, what we're trying to do is start to cultivate this idea that we need a movement ecotones, right? And that we'll be more resilient, we'll be more firm, we'll be more productive if these movements work together. And really, we don't really have time for anything else, right? And the way that, we're talking about carbon and climate change, that's a way of saying pollution, essentially. And it's like the pollution has gotten so bad that it is hitting everybody. Now, there's some communities that are hit first, there's some communities that are hit worst. But in my mind, the climate changing is basically the Earth's ecosystem and the Earth saying, we're not going to take any more of this exploitation anymore. That's enough. You can't actually do everything you're doing to people and their environments and just keep going along as though things are normal. It will not work. So there is a lot of opportunity there. It's hard because I feel like you have to talk about the problems first, especially to get us all to realize how pressing the issues are and how real, as people say, it's real what we're about to lose, But there have been people who've been working to create change for a really long time. There's a lot of movements that we can learn from. And what's crazy is that generally everyone is on board with this. Everyone wants to see the mountains. Everyone wants to see the ocean. And really everyone wants to see equity. So sometimes it's hard to even see, what are we even fighting about? At the core, we all want, it seems the vast majority, and we've been going around and asking people, at the end of it all, people want to have a healthy environment in a place that's equitable and not full of violence. Doesn't that sound decent? In a way, we've already lost we've already won the PR question. This is already what everybody wants. We just have to start working together to make it happen. So, that makes sense.
Thank you. So you guys just take a break and 5 after we'll start out.